Good evening. We're following developments in the Middle East tonight, where tensions between the United States and Iran are creating ripple effects far beyond the region. We'll break down the diplomatic standoff, what's really happening with energy markets, and what it could mean for your wallet. Here's what you need to know. The White House is claiming progress in discussions with Iran, but Iran's parliament speaker is pushing back hard. According to Iranian officials, the U.S. president is using the idea of talks as a way to deflect from what they're calling a deteriorating military situation involving both the United States and Israel. This denial underscores a fundamental disconnect in how each side is characterizing the current situation. The Iranian government is framing any discussion of negotiations as a propaganda move rather than a genuine diplomatic opening. This kind of public contradiction makes it difficult to assess whether any real back-channel communications are happening. The stakes are significant. Any actual negotiations could reshape regional dynamics, but right now, both sides appear to be using rhetoric as a tool to shape public perception and domestic political narratives. We'll continue monitoring whether this escalates further or if quieter diplomatic channels might eventually open. Energy prices are spiking worldwide, and the reason traces directly back to military strikes targeting Iranian oil and gas infrastructure. When significant portions of global energy supplies get disrupted, the usual economic fixes don't work as smoothly as they might in other situations. Rerouting shipments and diversifying suppliers can help manage shortages in normal circumstances. But when a substantial chunk of the world's oil and gas production suddenly vanishes from the market, those strategies have real limits. The math is straightforward. You can't replace supply that's been taken offline. This supply shock is already working its way through global markets, affecting everything from electricity generation to transportation to manufacturing. Energy costs are climbing, and those increases typically cascade through the economy. Consumers are likely to see higher prices at the pump, increased heating and cooling bills, and elevated costs for goods that depend on energy-intensive production or transportation. The longer these supply disruptions persist, the more pronounced these effects will become across household budgets and business operations worldwide. The connection between Middle Eastern military conflict and what you pay for groceries might not seem obvious, but it's very real. Energy costs are a fundamental input in nearly every part of the modern economy. When oil and gas prices spike, those increases ripple outward. Food production relies on fuel for farming equipment, transportation, and processing. Electricity powers everything from refrigeration to manufacturing. When energy becomes more expensive, producers pass those costs along. You'll see it first at the gas pump. But the effects spread much further. Heating and cooling your home will cost more. The food you buy will cost more because of transportation and production expenses. Manufactured goods will cost more. Even services that seem disconnected from energy, like healthcare or haircuts, often have energy costs built into their pricing. These aren't theoretical concerns. They're already beginning to show up in real prices. The duration and severity of the current supply disruption will determine how much of an impact reaches your wallet, but the direction is clear. Energy shocks have consequences that extend far beyond the energy sector itself. Some analysts argue that the current approach of direct military action, rather than prolonged diplomatic negotiations, represents a more effective strategy. The reasoning centers on the idea that decisive action achieves objectives more efficiently than extended talks that may or may not produce results. Proponents of this view point to the speed with which military operations can accomplish specific goals compared to the lengthy timelines typical of diplomatic processes. They contend that showing strength and willingness to act decisively can actually lead to better outcomes than years of negotiating. This perspective reflects a particular strategic philosophy about how international relations work, that credible demonstrations of capability and resolve can be more persuasive than negotiating positions. However, this approach carries significant risks and costs. Military action creates immediate humanitarian consequences, destabilizes regions, disrupts global markets, and can trigger escalation cycles that become difficult to control. The economic damage we're already seeing in energy markets illustrates one category of those costs. Different foreign policy experts weigh these trade-offs very differently, and reasonable people disagree substantially about whether this strategy ultimately serves national interests better than alternatives. Tonight, we've examined the escalating tensions between the United States and Iran, the diplomatic claims and denials coming from both sides, and the very real economic consequences already hitting global energy markets and household budgets. These developments will continue to shape international relations and economic conditions in the weeks ahead. We'll keep following this story closely. Thank you for joining us.